I'm extremely excited about not just our subject, but also our guests. We have a great guest who's very competent and qualified to help us to have the discussion that we're going to have today about how to communicate effectively with your minister. This is a hot topic because there's a lot of emotions that people have been feeling for a long time. And in some ways, right now, for people, there's kind of this awakening that's happening in people. And as that happens, it can be kind of turbulent. So, and I also just want to say, I have a plan to sort of interview a lot of different ministers. I think we need to talk to ministers. I think it's
Amen.
important that we talk to people who are ministering to people. It's a very special calling. And I also want to raise the level of just encouragement and the standards in terms of our love that we have for one another. We got to raise the standard of love. And I think in some ways, just the pain that we're in can lower it a little bit. So I want to get into our
Yeah.
guest today. We have a very special guest, Wade Cook.
Oh,
Wade, originally from Colorado,
yeah.
who is now a recent transplant to the San Diego area where he is serving in the Pomerado region. Is it Pomerado?
Pomerado. Yeah. Who would know
Pomerado.
that? Pomerado. It's a road.
Pomerado region of the San Diego Church of Christ. He was baptized in 1987 off
Yeah.
the camp. We can't tell, by the way. Can't tell, and I won't tell you how old I am, but off the campus of CU Boulder, and was blessed to have spent all but 2 of those years in Denver. Wade married the love of his life, Debbie Davis, in 1992. They love their 3 adult daughters, McKenzie, Chandler, and Alexis, beautiful names, all whom are growing in their walk with God as faithful disciples. Amen. Wade and Debbie went into the ministry in 1990 and served 24 years for the Denver Church of Christ, where they were appointed as evangelist and women's ministry leader in 2000, and Wade as an elder in 2017. From 2016 to 2019, they joyfully worked for Hope Worldwide, but felt called back into the full-time ministry, which is how they made their way to San Diego in 2019. Wade holds a bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Colorado and a master's degree in community counseling from Denver Seminary. He is a licensed professional therapist and has extensive experience in marital and premarital counseling, family dynamics, anger management, and substance abuse. He holds certificates in domestic violence counseling, very important, both
Mm.
group and individual crisis intervention and pre-marriage assessments. Wade co-chairs the diversity and inclusion team of the San Diego Church of Christ and is the staff liaison for the Hope Worldwide, our Hope Worldwide chapter. Some of Wade's favorite hobbies include golf, volleyball, traveling, and home improvements. Wade, welcome to the channel, brother.
Brother, thank you so much for being here, and a voice to many of from your audience. Thank you for the work you're doing, and it's a real honor to be a part to chat with you.
Can't wait to get into it. First, why don't you start us off a little bit about your conversion and then why you went into the ministry, and not just ministry, but counseling.
So yeah, 3 different important chapters, certainly in my life. I grew up going to church, and went to a church that had just some of the most beautiful salt of the earth families. It was a great experience. And what I learned from my time growing up was that God is real, God is good, the Bible is God's word, but I didn't really understand the Bible. I mean, I knew the stories of David and Goliath and in the Noah's Ark, etc. But the real applications and practice of life, I did not learn in that experience of growing up. So I was at church every Sunday and at choir practice and teen devotional Sunday nights or whatever. But the other 6 days of the week, I was as pagan as anybody else, sleeping around, smoking dope. I was so that was my Christian experience. And then I got invited to, there were a couple of things that had happened in my life. One of which was an abortion that I had with my girlfriend when I was 19. And that, along with a couple of other things, really started deep in my psyche running that something is wrong with me. Something is broken. There are decisions I make and the trajectory of my life that I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't know how to get help to where I'm going or where I want to go. So that was running in my mind when I got invited to this Bible study from the Church of Christ. Now, I was not interested in going to a Bible study, and in my mind, I was going to heaven anyway, because what would heaven be without me? So certainly I'm going. But this, as we started studying the scriptures, those thoughts in the back of my mind and the problems, and I just couldn't believe how much of life and my thinking was coming off the pages, and not in the righteous ways. But Galatians 5:19 was like a description of my previous weekend. Wow, I didn't realize these things were in the Bible. So what actually the best study I had in that source was going back to my old minister, who walked me through our plan of salvation. Now, the irony was lost on me when I went back to ask. I told my minister, I'm studying these Church of Christ people, and they're telling me I'm not saved, and I'm sure I'm saved. So tell me what's our plan of salvation so I can go defend myself. The irony that I didn't actually know that was lost on me. And what she described to me didn't make any sense at all. I'm like, are you kidding? That's what is the basis of our foundation? I can't go back and tell those guys that. I don't believe that. So I said, thank you, and I appreciate that. And that's what really started me thinking, maybe they're right. And let me look more authentically into the scriptures. And 3 weeks later, I was baptized. I was on my path to become a doctor, although I think I would have made a terrible doctor. So, so the Lord knew that, and graduated in 1991, was dating my girlfriend at the time, Deb. We were interns in the ministry, and got married in 92. We're leading a young Zoe. Stepped out of the ministry for a number of years, just doing our thing. And then Greg Moretsky, who was leading the church at the time, came to me and said, I think you could be really effective in the ministry. Would you give me a year to sort of train you and walk with you and see if it works out? And that year turned into 24 years. And so, much to the chagrin of my parents, who paid for that biology degree that I never used, I felt called into the ministry. And in 2008, I think, to the third part of the question, how did I get into counseling? It was in the turmoil of the Henry Crete letter, and a lot of people were leaving, and some were coming, and they're just the complexities of being a human being in a fractured and unstable church community, in an unstable society. Deb and I worked in the teen ministry, and I had an incident at teen camp where a young lady got open that she was being abused by her uncle, who wasn't a part of the church, but just I had no idea how to deal with that. I could pray for you, felt hurt, but the inadequacy of having tools to deal with the broad and broadening range of ministry situations is what propelled me to go to seminary, to go back to my counseling degree. And it wasn't even this idea of I'm going to become an incredible counselor. I just wanted to get some tools on how to help people in the church, and the profound blessings that came from that are time enough for another podcast, but all glory to God. So that's how I ended up in the faith, in the church, and in counseling.
Well, I think what you've just shared is actually worth really listening to and absorbing. The reason why I say that is because it's evidence that God is working in the hearts of ministers to be whole in their ability to minister and to be a complete minister. And not every minister is called to sort of explore every aspect or dimension.
Right.
And we need our ministers to really be solid in God's word, and that's what they preach and so forth. But I love that, God has people who he's stirring to become equipped, to equip people, and to help people heal. So I love everything you've just said.
International Churches of Christ, we had one template of a minister, and that alpha male who was tall, athletic, a little arrogant,
Yep.
but made things happen. And that making things happen became the kind of only ingredient of a minister. And I think that after the last number of years, I said the last 20 years, the people that are in the ministry now really want to be in the ministry. If you're still here, you really want to serve people. And that's no discredit for those who've gotten out, but I think we broaden, as the ICOC broadened our perspective. Well, what makes a good minister? We're still even figuring that out a little bit, but I want to give a shout out to anyone who's serving the full-time ministry. You are at heart surviving and doing a noble thing, and I appreciate you bringing your gifts to bear. And I think most people know that who aren't in the full-time ministry, but I also want to say that be kind, be gentle, at least give a word of affirmation to your minister this upcoming Sunday or midweek. Thank you for still being here.
I actually want to start there, because I think that the first thing is we need some orientation. Most of us will never spend our lives being paid by the church. We'll be amazing Christians, we'll make invisible contributions. I mean, we contribute in unseen ways, but a minister, they dedicate their life in a very visible way sometimes, and there's a lot of things they do that are also unseen, but there's a lot to being a minister and a lot on a person's plate. It's like a total life upheaval sometimes when you get called. I mean, it's someone's going one way in their life and then they're going another on faith. And the faith that it takes to go into the ministry and to endure all the things that a normal disciple, plus, that's your job, is being in that pulpit, being in that church and all that. I mean, it's just a lot. And so there's a lot of demands, administrative demands even. You've been in the ministry for a while. Can you let just the average person know a little bit more about that?
Well, I really appreciate that. I think that the ministry is such an emotional job. I don't think that maybe many appreciate how much emotion in terms of relationship one carries in the ministry. And not all negative, but as a minister, you're called to the most significant times of people's life: death, birth, tragedies, baptism. You are on a Sunday, there's really a double standard. One of the things I've never liked about the ministry, is just true. It's a double standard. I can't come to Sunday and go, you know what? I don't feel like giving today. I'm gonna sit back, right? Everyone else can, but you can't. You just got to figure it out. And so that has a little bit of a toll. It's more than made up for in prayer and time. And so I don't want to communicate at all that it's the hardest job in the world, but it's the emotional dynamic that I think is most different maybe than other professions. I think there's also an emotional toll in the fact of ministry. No matter what you do, 10% of the audience isn't going to like it. They're going to scowl at you. They're not going to like it. No matter what you do, about 15 to 20% are going to like you. And so but you can't engineer ministry to that 35%. It's the 65% in the middle that you have to think about, that you're trying to preach to, but you're mindful that there's those 10 and those emails that come. Again, that's part of that emotional cost. And the responsibility that a lot of us feel that my time is being made possible by other people's sacrifice. So there is a latent guilt, responsibility in a good way, but sometimes that can be overwhelming. That why am I just having a quiet time? I should always be doing something that honors people's sacrifice. Indeed, that's the case, but what does that look like? It is a challenge to the ministry of honoring people's sacrifice with my time in a way that's also emotionally healthy and balancing and respectful. So that's a hard dynamic.
Let me just do a commercial break for something on something you just said. Look, when people get stuck in their trauma, typically it eliminates possible narratives.
Hmm.
So in order to help someone heal, you have to give them new options in terms of telling the story. And those don't feel very possible when we're hurt because we just need to protect ourselves and we do not want to get hurt again. What
Right.
you've just done, if you've kind of expanded people's understanding to include that someone actually feels indebted, right? So when we think about the growth pressures, right, that's a real thing I actually really want to tangibly ask about in just a moment. But the growth pressures to grow the church, keeping the lights on figuratively and also literally,
Really. Yeah.
there's all kinds of pressures that sort of get internalized. And I think one of the craziest things, and as I've studied this recently, even more so, is that ministers can take things very personal that
Oh,
they really have no business taking personally, but all of that can start to derange a person and things can get twisted around. And at the bottom of it, I just thought this was so interesting is they feel indebted to the people who are giving from their, from their lives, they feel indebted to people that maybe at times they've hurt. Wow, that was kind of a moment
that
for me.
that is really uh, uh, very insightful that you would pick that up, Kyle. There is this weird juxtaposition of indebted, respectful to, or feel responsive to people that are at times, not most, but some at times, the source of your own traumas. And as a minister, that is. So if you preach a lesson, and this has happened to me a couple times, the exact same lesson, someone has come up and said, you are the new Jesus. Why don't you ever, well, you should always preach. Man, that's the most insightful thing. It's really helpful. Someone else will come up and say, this happened to me twice. This is my last sermon here because of you.
Oh
That
my
same lesson,
goodness.
you
Oh,
are the problem. You represent, all this history and trauma. I don't know how in the world you even got hired. I'm out of here, and I want you to know it's because of you. I'm like, in the same lesson.
are you serious? Wow.
that came as an email twice, one to my face, one as an email. My point being, as a person, imagine, honest member, you saying something that you think is God glorifying. One person raises you up too much, another person is the reason why you're leaving. And in your head, my lesson isn't why you're leaving the whole church and the fellowship, but it does feel very personal because you're personally invested. And as a minister, being able to tease apart what is what's their stuff, what do I need to hear from that and listen to that, and even just listen, but to not take it personally, to take personal what you should, but not take personally what you shouldn't. That's hard.
It is. And part of this, and I don't want people to feel like this is going to be like some bias or whatever, but the thing is that holding a both and takes a lot of energy emotionally and spiritually. And there's a both and. I have a lot of people who come on and talk about the trauma that's happened to members, but I also think it's important to talk about the trauma that happens to ministers, because when you look at Barna research, I actually just shared this last week, as it relates to ministers and trauma, they report in terms of recent and current less experiences of trauma, but where pastors actually score the highest is in the past, the things that happened that maybe even before they went into the ministry. And I just think it's important, for some of us who are just like, yeah, but what about me? Okay, trauma is everybody's problem. Okay, it's you lose and I lose. And that's something I just sort of want to, for our listeners, there's another side of this I want to take a look at. In transitioning to the next question, there is a great deal of tension between ministers and members. What are some insights that you believe contribute to this tension?
Now, that's a good question. I preface it, though, to even think when there's tension between members and ministers, I'm not sure that there is a wholesale tension between, speaking of the International Church of Christ, all members or most members and ministers. But when there is tension between minister and minister, I do think that there are some key ingredients, if I might be able to shift that
Please, please.
that foci a bit. One is that I'll put on the minister side. They may not be interested in hearing or hearing out a person's perspective or trauma, particularly trauma. So if someone has an issue with the George Floyd killing, as a minister, wherever you're coming from, I don't want to hear you out. That doesn't belong in the church. Let's talk someplace else. And that is on the minister. That if someone is bringing you their problems, I'll quote from the late Colin Powell, he just passed away. That means that they have concluded one of two things. One, you care, or two, you can do something about it. When people stop bringing you their problems, they concluded one of two things. You don't care, or you can't do anything about it.
Very good. Wow.
So when people are bringing you their problems, take that as a sign of trust that they've concluded you care or you can do something about it. That's why they're talking to you. Minister, honor that as a gift. If even as much as to listen and affirm and spend the time to receive and listen and care. So I think where there's tension, ministers don't take as much time as they could and should in hearing those voices. I think a second is that in our fellowship, there is a growing and uncomfortable, uncomfortable is not the right word, but wrong flow of or hearing these voices, hearing my favorite news channel, listening to my favorite tweet over the Bible. We are becoming secular Christians in our fellowship. And I think that creates a tension, because when we are not spiritual thinking and reinforcing spiritual thinking, we'll address our problems less spiritually. And that creates a tension and a gap between solution and actual hearing and affirmation. So subtle, but I think every Christian, minister and not, need to really think, does the Bible still have the priority and the most power to move the needle in my perspective, in my feelings? And I'm not condescending to feelings. And I'm saying, please listen to your channel of choice. But if that starts to become your talking points, if that starts to become the way you view the world and the church and ministers, that will create tension.
I like that you first clarified when. I'll give you a great example. So Tim Churro, he's our lead evangelist. I kid you not, I have this guy's back hard. Like, I have Tim, I mean, he's like a father figure to me, and him and I, we meet weekly. Me and Tim are good. Now, do we agree on everything? No, we don't agree on everything, but I trust him, and I don't have to agree with somebody in order to trust them.
Right.
I think that sometimes people, that's kind of a precursor. That's a sort of a, deals off if we don't agree. And that's where cancer culture, that's a whole nother, it's a different podcast. But I think what's important is that trust, and it all came once because on our back porch, we just had some real beef once. And I was on his back porch and he said something to me I'll never forget. He said, Kyle, let's promise to trust each other. I have never looked back. That's probably 7 years ago. And he is somebody that again, those relationships exist just like people who have been really damaged as well. And I think that's part of what's so challenging is when you were talking about wholesale, we have so many diverse situations specifically. And they're in the pile of that, in the shrapnel pile, you do have a lot of bad interactions that have gone, and some of it is ministry blame, if we're going to be honest. And then there's another part of it's member blame. So anyway, I to your point, there are different types of relationships that people have with their minister. And I think that's a great, fair point.
Yeah. And where there's a lack of relationship, just as you said, lack of trust is typically where there's most distance and difficulty. So we're all familiar with the, I shouldn't say we're all familiar, but the straw man, they are ... I remember back in our day, a certain church that was recruiting a lot of members from other churches. And I would always, say, well, they are, well, who they?
Yeah.
Brian, Jessica, Craig? No, oh no, those guys. I love those guys, but they.
Hmm.
And when your ministry staff or whoever, catalyst team, service team, however you're organized, when they become they, there's such a great room for Satan to jump in. But you just set a profound example with your with Tim. Hey, let's promise to trust each other, give each other the benefit of the doubt. Our relationship isn't based on our mutual agreement. Our relationship is based on my commitment to First Timothy to love you. Out of First Timothy to our First Thessalonians to honor you, to be patient with you. First Corinthians 12. That's how we can navigate difficult things and listen to each other and really come to places of peace that aren't based on agreement necessarily, but on I trust you, I love you, we're on the same team.
Yeah, it's kind of like the good faith sort of pledge. It's I believe, like you were saying, the best, and that can be damaged, and it needs a way to be repaired. And I think so. This next question is interesting. So, how can a member or the average member in a church more effectively approach ministers when they see things that need to change, and vice versa? So when ministers need change, but also when members need change.
Yes. I asked a couple of other ministers looking forward to this interview, some of their responses to our conversation. And this one generated probably the most response, which I will help. So I'll try to give an amalgam of all of our responses. When the average member, even the unaverage member, sees a real problem, number one, think through what is it that I'm really trying to communicate before you just pop up. What am I really trying to communicate? And take the time and the gift, which is true in all conflict resolution, of putting the person at the other end of me in the best position I can for them to hear what I'm saying. So my posture, my words, what am I actually communicating? So just take the time. Two, ministers are people too. They are human beings too. So I think sometimes we think about ministers as some do therapists. I'm paying you, Jack, to listen. Your feelings don't enter this conversation. So I'm going to pay you. In response, you listen and you give me some therapeutic tools to help me get through this. Go. I think sometimes we look at our ministers as our therapists. I'm paying your guy, so you're going to sit and listen, and you're going to hear me out, and you're going to affirm me. But your ministers are people too. So not punching bags or the source of your trauma, unless they are, then communicate that. You have harmed me in this specific way, or it feels, we should always use the F word, right? When we're talking, it feels like I want to, I always like to use that. My wife's
I'm going to use that now. I love that.
Let's use the F word. I feel like you're coming from this word, or it's sure seeing it, the way it came across me, the way it landed on me was ... Giving the person the space to communicate that, and vice versa. Ministers, this also applies to you. What are you really feeling? What is the problem? And then put the other person in the position to hear. And I think that if we have a spirit of that kind of communication based, as you said, even on that trust, giving each other the benefit of the doubt, and that trust can be damaged, absolutely. And if it is, then just put words to that. Wade is sitting across from minister, and I know that what I'm about to say comes in a context where the trust between us isn't what it should be. So I want to work on my part of the trust. So please hear that also. And maybe some of what I'm feeling is because I don't trust you or don't know you. So let's Just put that out there. Now that may feel threatening too, but that's how we can have real. What do you mean don't trust me? Boy, great question. Let that narrative get to. Usually we'll get to what's really going on. But those are the first two things I say. Ministers are people too, but think to yourself, start with yourself. What am I trying to say? How is it coming across? What's it like to be on the other end of me in this conversation? And that approach will really help a lot of conversations go more smoothly.
I love everything that you just shared, because when we are in our untriggered self, when we're not flooded, we can maybe grasp that. When people are hurt and damaged and their thinking patterns have changed because the emotional side of their brain has taken over, they typically aren't thinking that way. And it's hard. And some people live there. Some people actually, I've realized, even going to the church can set them off. Being in the building. That's, trauma, unfortunately, it's kind of the gift that just keeps giving when you don't want it to. And so anyway, I love everything you're saying, that, I really want people in their calm self to really take what you're saying in.
And just be aware of that, that if you're triggered, even by just being in the building, give voice to that. Know that that's part of the conversation too. And that will, meaning not that that's for them to fix,
right?
But know that that's on me. So coming to a conversation where you're persuadable, I think that's where you're humble. When we say humble, I think what we've meant before is I'm more demure than the minister. And I don't mean that. I'm going to take Frank Kim's definition of humility, which is humility is not diminishing yourself. It's not beating yourself up. It's lifting the other person up. So humility isn't a I'm terrible, I'm low, please thank you for giving me your attention. But it's saying, I'm going to honor you by the respectful tone that I have, by my honesty, by my presence. I'm going to lift you up. I want to encourage, and not necessarily even just, but to give you the benefit of the doubt, that I'm open. The door swings both ways. Some of the most strong personalities in the church, I feel very close to, if the door swings both ways. So I'm hearing, but are you persuadable too? We need to come to conversations in our own humility that says, I'm also persuadable. Not that I'm totally wrong, but maybe I'm off a little bit. Am I open to hearing that also? And if I'm not, conversation isn't going to go where it could.
Well, I think what you're talking about, which I've actually, in my research, the consistent theme that has been coming up as I've been taking research dives recently, is safety. Yes. And safety is not something that can be assumed. It has to actually be negotiated. Oftentimes, that idea of safety that you're talking about, that I'm in a safe space, and we know in terms of trauma, mental health, people's spiritual health, that when people feel safe, they're open. They take risks. They have to feel safe. And everything it feels like you're saying is within the context of creating safety.
Now, let me ask you a question in that same way. How do you? I'm about to say, how do you reconcile? But I want to fold into the really thoughtful things you're saying. Love your enemy. Turn the other cheek. How would you, if I can flip?
I love it. I don't have people ask me questions. Ask me, brother. Yeah, it's good.
How do you fold into those challenges of Jesus to love your enemies, turn the other cheek, go the extra mile, and create safety? How do we do that? Because both are there.
Well, yeah. And so for me, this goes to my bigger thesis work, which is studying out biblical humanity. What does it mean to be human? And what I find is that if people don't have the ability to articulate what it means to be human, they'll typically get pulled into humanism, right? That's kind of the war, right? Christians are so frustrated at secular people because they're talking about things that are humanistic, right? Well, the reality is that Christians struggle to define what it means to be human just as much. People don't know what it means to be human, and so Christ understood. He is the firstborn of a new race. He is the first.
Perfect
He's what
human.
we know about what it means to be human, his example. And so he sets that tone. And when we realize is especially when you look at research on what it means to be human and healing and so forth and safety, you see that like when people are hurting, they do things differently than someone who does things that are unhealthy. So like in Isaiah,
Huh.
like 31 and Jeremiah or Lamentations 1, they call that their enemies, this is a great example, be made as they are, not lower, but as they are. When you understand what it means to be human, then you can follow the royal law. And that's part of that thing is I think that at the end of the day, and I know I'm probably not completely answering your question, but I
No,
think
no,
the
it's
root
good.
issue is that we don't really know what it means to be human because we think that being human is bad. I actually had this conversation with Dr. Roland Monhe in our
Wow.
last video about being human. There's this dichotomy going on in people where they don't really know what it means to be human. So we ask these same questions, and I love the question you're asking. But the basis of it is that what it means to be human is to do what Jesus did. And when he got struck, we know that he took sort of all of punishment on him. We're called to have that attitude. We're called to take up our cross. And that's literally the highest version of being, a human, so to speak. But that has to be our most dominant core assumption. I think that's going to have to be taught.
Well
I think
stated.
people have to be taught what it means to be human.
Wow. I there's a book, low plug here, the Emotionally Healthy Church.
Yes.
And
Is that Peter?
Peter Scazzaro.
Yeah.
And one of the, if in my list, one of the top 5 books that formed me as a minister, because I felt like he was a minister talking to ministers.
Mm.
And in the preface of the book, he says there are 2 fundamental premise that he's working from. One, that Jesus is the Son of God, that his words are divine, and we rightly should listen to, but he's also the perfect human being.
Right.
He is the goal of how you handle emotions, and he communicates and expresses and feels the entire range of emotion. But he's the perfect human, and we don't study him as much in that regard as we should. This is what it is to be human. I just was really struck by that, and you just reiterated it.
Absolutely. That's my love is studying out what does it mean to be human. Trauma is anything that makes us less human.
Wow.
Right. So to not forgive someone, that damages you. This is what you see in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission over in South Africa when they were studying apartheid reparations.
Yep.
And that's one of the things that they looked at it as a total institution from oppressor to oppressed, that everyone was called to acknowledge the collective trauma of apartheid racism. And that as the oppressor, that you were then sort of looking at yourself and saying, that damaged me to treat someone like that. Right. Those are the beginnings of what it means to be human, is you realize that everything you do either makes you less or more human. Anyway, that's a whole nother.
Wow.
I love that you asked that question. That's a great.
No, that's a great question. And as you were talking, I would suspect, and I'll say almost everyone in the ministry has somebody who would consider them the oppressor.
Absolutely.
And there are 3 people that come to my mind right now. They're listening to this. I'm sure they're going, "You got to be kidding. What a hypocrite Wade is." It's exactly the problem. How do we ministers, or how does that person, is there reconciliation there? Meaning, start by saying, where can Wade identify that I was the abuser, but I didn't do the thing you said I did. I wasn't thinking the thing you said I did. The trauma you feel I inflicted, I don't think I did. So as a minister, how do I hear, and how would Kyle counsel me to be a part of creating a safe space? Maybe particularly for those that every minister has that couple or person.
So why do you, I love this. Why do you ask that? I think that's a great, but why do you ask that?
I think because what triggered me when you said, the Truth and Reconciliation Council, I actually read that report. I thought it was amazing. Always been struck by Nelson Mandela and his ability to set a tone that set in his response. I want to set such a tone, but also feel at times I should apologize or take responsibility for things that I don't think I did.
Gotcha.
And so, but that doesn't help. You know, if you're in front of someone as a minister who feels like you harmed me, the response to go, well, I'm sorry you feel that way.
You know, as a counselor, as an elder, where that's going to go.
Yeah, I know as a counselor. I know not to say that. I know that's not going.
And as
well.
a husband.
Yeah, totally. But I don't still know how to honor. I affirm and hear that you feel that way. At what place does my perspective help in that we can find a place together? That's a very amorphous question. So the answer to question lies in my head. That's what's straight in my head.
I love this. I love the idea of just kind of you spontaneously kind of thinking through some stuff. I love this. I'll say on two ways. One is more, 10,000 foot view, and then one's more specific. When you look at trauma research, the perpetrator is seen as omnipotent. So like you think of Stockholm syndrome, or you think about people who are kidnapped, and their psychology is completely rewired because they're held captive or something. That, or you look at kids when they're abused. When kids are young, like my son is 2, we're like gods to them. And so what happens is when you look in Israel's history, their perception of the perpetrator it's something that needed to be dealt with. So when you are going through a trauma, your perception of the perpetrator typically is elevated. You were mentioning, like with humility, when people abuse other people, they sort of extort that repositioning, right, to be higher than someone else. And so that's extortion. I think to some degree, that idea of being human, it comes back to the perpetrator is human. Hitler was human. Again, this is kind of hard to just stomach.
Right.
But when that person becomes human, my approach changes. Okay, and that's wholesale across. When someone is damaged, their perception of the perpetrator has to be addressed. I'd say more specifically, I did a video on 3 tools for handling heated conversations, something to that extent. And typically when I'm talking with people, I have ways of disarming them. One of which is I ask them, well, what do they feel most, like, what do you feel threatened by here? I want to know the threat, because what trauma does is it gets us to orient towards the threat, and then our arousal and our physiology literally elevate, because when we scan and we see a threat, everything in us is going to now do what we do when we feel threatened. What do you feel like I don't get? Again, like you were saying earlier, hey, I'm an ally. We have to have those pro-social signals of saying to people, I'm an ally. And so the difference is coming at versus coming to someone. And so when I'm doing those things, that's part of what I'm signaling I'm an ally. With trauma, you have to do that. That's kind of the ritual of relationship with people who have been massively traumatized, is you have to send those signals that it is safe. I'm an ally. And I'm genuinely curious. I think the cure for criticism is curiosity. And so we have to be curious rather than critical. And anyway, we could go talk.
No, man, that is Kyle Spears mic drop stuff. So ministers listening to that, learn
well, brother,
that's so good.
Let me ask you, is someone who, because I think this is important too. We can't expect too much of our ministers. Again, we're human, right? I have a friend who said that to some degree, like, he works with pastors, and he was saying that we need our politicians and our pastors to be perfect in order to sleep at night. And so pastors are, and if you could just for a moment, just take a moment to remind the audience how human pastors, how human ministers are. Is there any way you could just remind us?
Yes. I constantly am haunted by that scripture that those who are leaders, Paul even talks about elders, they desire noble tasks. They will be held to account. And I really take those seriously. Every minister I've talked to does too. So there's a constant feeling of, am I doing the right thing? Am I saying the right thing? Am I prioritizing the right things that are God pleasing? That's a pressure. We want to do what is God pleasing and glorifying, and know in our own minds all of the weakness thoughts.
Yep.
When I was appointed an elder, that was my greatest kind of insecurity. I remember talking to Chris Jacobs, and I'm like, brother, if people knew how far away I am from real faith, you wouldn't, you'd be alarmed. I'm alarmed. Why in the world am I here? Chris said, brother, listen, to be an elder is just to be a good Christian. To be the best Christian you can. And let the Holy Spirit, you're not in place of the Holy Spirit in people's lives. So we are people that struggle with insecurity. We are people that are definitely have some truths. We have flat sides. I go back to, I had a girlfriend in college who was going to write a book and the title was When Your Parents Become People. Ooh. And I thought that was just a perfect title, this transition of recognizing your parents that are all knowing, all seeing, know everywhere. They actually were teenagers. They made mistakes. They have insecurities. They have fears. So if I could write a pamphlet, when your minister becomes a person, what does that look like?
I love it. And I'll share briefly this. This is something that I think is a trend that I'm going to have many more folks come on and ministers really address. There was an article, and the name of the article is when churches abuse pastors.
Wow.
And this article gets into when, like, you have church members who feel like there's too much change going on in the world. They don't just experience those as shifts, they experience those as violent shifts. And then what happens is those feelings of feeling like you're going to become a relic or obsolete, now all of a sudden those feelings sort of amplify, and then they lash out at pastors as a result. And so when you think about what's going on and the angst that you think about the last political season, have mercy. Oh. I mean, that really, our churches, I think, I would say we're not really that different from society, because whatever divides the world tends to divide the church. So, but all of that angst sort of was navigated and then gets projected out to pastors. And so can we just talk for a moment, what is it like to be a minister during a very like a horrible time of unity?
Oh my gosh. There was an Instagram picture. I sent it to you earlier, Kyle. I don't know if you got it or if I sent it correctly. I don't think I saw it. But it's an old picture. You remember the OJ, there's a snapshot, but OJ.
Oh, I did see that. Oh, yeah.
And there's all the police cars.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw that.
And over the license plates were the police cars, vaxxing, non-vaxxing, Democrat, Republican, vaccinate, not vac. And all of those race, diversity, all of those cars are chasing the pastor. And I do think it has been more difficult the last couple of years than it had been previously, in any year previous to my time in the full-time ministry, because there were such, and still continue to be, such seismic shifts in our culture. You just said it so well. I want to read that article, that when a shift happens, there is, for some, a response or a fear. Is the church going to follow that too? Is the church going? And we have COVID. Are people coming back to church, or are they not coming back to church? Is Zoom church a legitimate form of meeting with the body? Yes or no. Should I get vaccinated? I'm getting phone calls, just my first last week. I would like you to write me a religious exemption for the mandate of vaccination.
Whoa.
Should I do that? Wow. That's a question I never had before. Women's role. and the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter. That should have come up from the pulpit, should have not come up from the pulpit. And I'm not trying to make a stand at you. I'm just saying these are the emails and questions of which there's an expectation that the minister is going to know what they're saying and what should be said. But most people approach those as, I have a right answer, and I'm checking the minister to see if he's going to respond in the way that I think is the right answer.
Absolutely.
And so there seems to be more of those critics, and the pulpit is just more tender. There's more eggshells that you're trying not to walk on. And then sometimes you some may get frustrated. I've never been, so I'm sure others I've just heard. But you get the pulpit and you go, you know what, enough. I'm going to step on every eggshell. And that doesn't help anyone. Now you just have shells.
Well, wait, let me ask you this. I would say what threatens the pulpit has changed. That the media outlets, technology has amplified news sources that people can, and now all of a sudden it's the media has been democratized. So my thought is, even this channel is an interesting community of folks. You know, people can find their tribe virtually now. Yeah. And so then what happens is let's say someone's listening to this and they go to their evangelist and their pain gets named and they're like, you need to listen to this, finger in the chest. And the approach is just award winning. And it's like, okay, what kind of taste is that going to leave in that minister, that evangelist's mouth? Because, and now instead of allying up, you know, and viewing sort of, because there's no going back. You and I can see very clearly, whether it be the command center approach is where people drive 2 hours to come to your, or you go through the community. It's very clear people don't have to drive 2 hours anymore to come to your church. Okay. That's done. And we're never going back. And I want my audience to know that that is what I believe. and then building through the community, actually, research is clear. It's better to build through through the community, because people can grow better and heal better when you go through the community anyway. Regardless, the way that ministers minister is just all over the place. It's like, how do I do this now? And there is not a manual for how you now minister during and after the pandemic, which after the pandemic, we have no clue when that's going to be. We have no clue. Right? So anyway, I say that to just say for a moment, just that I have to imagine for ministers, it is disorienting to know how is our fold, how are we going to minister? What is that going to look like? That's got to feel pretty tough and pretty challenging, I have to imagine, for a minister.
It is. And you know, one thing that has just popped in my mind that's helped me recently is I need to let go of a couple of what I guess I would have called them convictions, or at least re-examine. One, does someone need to come to my church to be saved? Is it okay that someone leaves? And I think yes. I think if a person is going to do better spiritually someplace else, that's a big, then they should be at that someplace else. That my ministry, me as a person, am the best minister for some. I'm not the best minister, or in my personality and my temperaments, for all. And so is that okay? I have to let go of that. The second is to remind myself, although I preach all the time, this isn't actually my ministry. This is God's. I am God's. I have the opportunity to speak, to minister, to preach, to pray for, to serve. And to the best of my ability, these are God's children. Keeping that in mind, that the Holy Spirit is who convicts of sin. Keeping in mind that I too am a child of God, just ministering. It's not mine, it's His. And I just get to be a shepherd and steward my resources. That has released a little pressure.
I appreciate you saying that. I think where I'm struggling, I'm going to go off script just here a moment.
Yeah.
We bred ministers to be like dogs. Like we bred them to, I mean, like you were saying, the sort of a little bit of the caricature in the beginning of a minister. They're athletic, they're a jock, they're this, they're that, they're forceful, whatever. okay, well, I think somewhere in the DNA of our subconsciousness, there's this kind of like, is that really going to get it done to let go or whatever? Here's what I would say. In our church, Tim Churro is one of the most amazing men I could ever follow. He is just incredible. He's only been in our church for 7 years, but he went and got a master's in missional leadership. There's a different term for it, but it's a master's degree in a form of theology. He took a sabbatical during the pandemic. This is last year, literally. And I want you to just think for now, like, so we're growing, bro. We've baptized so many people. We are growing. And to your point, the question, the ultimate test for the fellowship and for the ministers is that if you allow your ministers to get a sabbatical, like there are certain ministers who are 30 years overdue for a sabbatical. What kind of product do you think you're going to get? They don't have a shelf life that's just extended forever. So like, but Tim is a different man now than he was last year. And I can verify that. And the way that like our squad is functioning, and the teaching and, it's just, I mean, I'm excited to say, I mean, he's going to be appointing me as a teacher in December. Wow. I'm super excited about it, which is awesome. Our relationship is, but the point is, I'll just say that we have to take care of our pastors. Because I don't want to preach. So I'm just being real for a moment there. I don't want to, we got to take care of them. And some of them have to be convinced to go on a sabbatical, that type of thing. Anyway, there's a whole nother,
There's the threads of training win the ministry. I remember hearing, listen, tired people win the world. I remember hearing, you'll rest in heaven. The plain time rest. Don't worry about that now. That we still come out of a culture, and I'm not dismissing it. I just want us to honor it, that baptisms are our currency. Growth justifies everything. Growth is, people need to become Christians. I'm fully committed to the mission. Absolutely. But how does that play in your own personal expectation and evaluation of your minister and of your ministry and of yourself? I'm just throwing those out as things that I think are part of this sabbatical conversation, minister to congregant minister to minister conversation. If baptism is the only current, baptisms are your resume. We've been trained that way.
And you're very qualified to say this, and part of why I'm going to extend the interview a little bit today, just because I feel like, you were appointed as an elder, which we are sorely in need of. We need that just across our fellowship. And then, as a counselor, and this is kind of in the next question here, the role of therapy and counseling in churches is really growing. And sorting out counseling issues from ministry issues is getting harder, because to some degree, we're expecting our pastors to also sort of be equipped with those skills as well. We kind of need our pastors to be an elder and a deacon and a board member, and we need them to be so many things. And also, when the person's at the hospital and when the person needs the funeral, like we need them for so many things. But there's this issue in our churches where, okay, there are counseling issues and there are ministry issues, and someone like you is positioned very well to sort of explain to us what the differences are.
I love you saying that. In general, the healthiest people I've seen have 3 different legs on a healthy stool. The first is God in themselves. Part of your emotional development, spiritual recovery, emotional recovery, whatever it may be, is your work in God. And that's a piece of it. And there's work that only you and only the Holy Spirit can do. And that's a piece of it. The second is that you have a ministry leg or a team. So the body, having people in your life. This is a profound bit of healthy spirituality. Do you have, in my opinion, 3 or 4 people? It doesn't have to be the whole church, but you have 3 or 4 who know it all, who you're doing life with, who you allow to influence you, and that you run things by, and you get, you have reflection, not doing life by yourself. And the third leg of that, I think, is counseling. Not everyone's got to go to counseling, but there are definitely some wisdoms from the world and specifically even some trauma that therapy really, really helps in ways that the other two don't and can't. So if you have a threefold stool, I don't know if I'm doing that properly. You and God is one piece, relationship, community, another piece, and therapeutic work, or not humanism, but therapeutic skills and training and experience that's outside of the church. I think that can be very helpful. Counseling. I think ministry is the activity and behaviors that impact others. That's, as an example, I hate my Bible talk. Okay, well, the ministering part of that is, what about your relationships with them and their relationship with you can change and needs to change? That's ministry. The counseling is what happens internally, what behaviors and actions impact you. Same example, why do you hate people? Why do they hate you? That's counseling work. And so the ministry is the work that impacts others in your community. The counseling work is that which impacts yourself.
The last question here, and I want to get your thoughts here, because I want to get everything I can out of you. Many across our fellowship are eager for emotional healing. Okay. As a minister who's also a counselor, what advice do you have for those who are trying to heal and grow? So specifically, one of the things I'm going to start talking about more is the letter. You find a great ratio of folks who their resiliency didn't seem to mirror what the expected resiliency was for the 2003 letter. A lot of people are still trying to figure out what happened, right? There was a, blast radius, so to speak. And, people have, just at times you can't program yourself out of it. And they feel badly about that. And then they feel like, they want to kind of get back to the way things were, or they don't want to disappoint God.
Yeah.
But they have this very real, trauma that sort of endures. What advice or encouragement do you have for that?
Boy, man, I have a perspective on it, but I'll share that for another time, of what the letter meant, or what it should have meant, how to build resiliency. I think if I understood your question correctly, when people are, those in our fellowship who want to heal, move on, resolve, I'm not saying just move on, but heal, resolve. The first is a real key to think, do you really want to? It's in the spirit of Jesus asking, do you want to walk? There is not it's a deep question that friend, Bible talk person, member of the church, sometimes my only identity is the bugged one. Maybe you're holding on to that. So do you want to? You have to internalize. Second is, and it's not just easy, I want to be, flip a switch. Most do, but if you do answer, yes, I do want to be healed. Number two, what are you doing that is producing that some healing? I think first thing is start to talk. Create that safe place, and if you don't have it already, and put voice to this, to say to someone, all right, enough. Kyle, you probably know this from your counseling. When is the moment that people begin healing? It's when they make an appointment with their therapist. That first phone call to actually set up a time, and I'm going to meet next Thursday at 2:00 at your office. The healing begins. There is a sense of, okay, I'm on the road. So I think that was out of a study that you literally begin the process by starting. Now, it doesn't finish the process, but that's where I would say to people who are maybe feel stuck, that there is a grief, there's trauma, there's difficulty. Some is better than worse, or more profound than others. But one, do you want to be healed? Two, start, talk. Do you have a safe place where you're beginning? And then maybe three, get some help, create a care team for yourself. And maybe that care team is, again, those 3 or 4 people that are in your life. Maybe a therapist is one on that care team, maybe not. But can you identify a care team? These 3 brothers or these 2 sisters or this person is who's walking with me, working with me. Those would be really 3 things I'd say.
Thank you for being tangible and a little more concrete. Some of this can be very destructuring, and like trauma is one of those things that just it takes the floor from you, from underneath you. And what you just given are just some things that people can create some hinges on and really start taking some steps. I like what you said about the first appointment. That makes a lot of sense, because I do find that some people who are like if I take a couple, they're like, yeah, actually, since we made the appointment, things have been a little better. That happens a lot. So I appreciate that. And I'm like, it makes sense. But I appreciate just the tangibility. And as a minister, I think that's something I think is a real gift from our ministers, is that they are gifted in communicating to people the things that God wants to do in terms of his promises and his will. Ministers are called.
Yeah, some are better than others, but
Yes.
everyone desires, and at least that can be honored,
But it's so invaluable. And I with my channel, I really want for people, for all people to be elevated, because I think this is me. I think every gift is the most important. I think an evangelist is the most important. I also think a teacher is the most important. And I also think an elder and a deacon are the most important. And I think as a minister, those who minister, however you minister, I just want you to be encouraged, and God is up to something. Anyway,
that is beautiful.
I want to ask you, do you have any announcements, anything you just want to share with the people?
Man, I don't. I would say pass on this podcast and avail yourselves of the many wonderful resources that are out there. And I don't know if it made this the recording, but Kyle, I want to thank you personally for your work and your engagement. And it takes way more time and energy to plan and prepare and record than it does certainly to listen in the gym to a podcast. But that time and energy that you plant is an investment, and it is making a difference. It is making us as a fellowship a little more, helping us to be a little more like Christ. And I just want to honor you and thank you for your work. And not just being a guest, I'm really humbled by that. But if there's any announcement, it's thank you. And for those in my hearing, listen to the previous ones.
Amen.
And pass this on. You're doing good stuff.
It means a lot coming from you, bro. I really do respect you. And
thank you.
Besides the titles and all of that, bro, you just are always on the front lines. Even if you have an opportunity to sort of go over here and change your positioning on the battlefield, you just continue to go to the front lines. I think that says a lot about you and Deb.
You're humbling. This is one of those places where if you really knew.
Oh yes. We have that. Well, I'm going to say to you what I say to all my guests, and I really mean it, that we are with you, and God is for you, my brother. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Well, if you stayed with us through the entire podcast, which some of you absolutely do, it blows me away. And some of you go back and listen over and over and over to the same ones. I just so thank you for growing, helping me to grow the channel. It is continuing to emerge, and it blows me away that so many people find this so useful. And I'm grateful. Please continue to like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Thank you.